staff and the students. His book, Humankind and the Cosmos, Early Christian Representations, which was published with Brill last year, is really an amazing tome because it addresses a contemporary concern, the relationship between Christians and the natural environment. How do Christians interact with the planet Earth, with its animals, its plants, its seaways, its mountains? How do they make sense of their place in that world? The book uses a range of different methodologies which are interesting: historical, literary, philosophical, theological. And while it is strongly grounded in early Christian patristic texts in order to support the thesis that Costache advances, it also includes material culture evidence, and it's a major engagement between late antique and early medieval theology and ideas in the philosophy of science. I was incredibly happy to read this book, not only because Chris said that Gary wrote like an angel. Doru's writing is something that I have always greatly enjoyed for its crystalline clarity, but also because he pointed out in the opening chapter that the field of study effectively began with D.S. Wallace Hadrill's The Greek Patristic View of Nature, which was published in 1968. I grew up, well, not quite grew up, but got there via the tutelage of Eric Sharp to the world of the medieval Franks, in which J.W. Wallace Hadrill was an absolute idol of all students in my early years of PhD research. And his book, The Frankish Church, is still one of the books on my shelf in my office that I value the most. And so there are connections and links between all sorts of work that different people are engaged with. The other thing that's really interesting about this book is that it is very open about the fact that Christians engaged with both positive and negative views of the material world. There is a sense in which the creation made by God is marvelous and beautiful, magnificent and wholly positive. And there is a sense in which materiality involves sin, the fall, the creature, not the creator, something that is perhaps tainted because of its non-spiritual nature. The book is an exercise in contextualization as well, which I think is an important issue for all of us. One of the strongest academic themes in religious studies in perhaps the last 30 years, since 1990, and strikes terror into my soul to say that 30 years ago was 1990, because I kind of feel like it should perhaps have been a lot earlier, but time passes, as you know. But one of its key themes is contextualization historically and in terms of the intellectual traditions of the time. So it's a book about how Christians engaged with what their world understood to be science, which includes all sorts of things: physics, zoology, biology, and the idea that is brought forth in the book is that these engagements have something to say to 21st century people working on the interface between science and religion. And I think this is an amazing and important subject. The subject is both cosmology, what the universe looks like, and anthropology, where the human is placed in the universe, and what sort of destiny is intended for the human. Does the human take primacy? Is there another way of reading the cosmos? If the human takes primacy, why were they created at the end of the creation process in the Genesis text? Does it not suggest that the idea that primacy implies antiquity is perhaps troubled or wrong? There are so many fascinating authors that I've spent a lot of my life reading, because even though now most people know me as a writer of strange and potentially fringe subjects in the contemporary world, I did begin properly as an early medievalist, and I was nurtured by Gary and the late Professor Eric Sharp, who died in 2000 and who is missed to this day, in respect for and active interest in the way in which late antique Christian thought fed into that early Middle Ages. So I encountered, as I read Doru's book, everyone from Ignatius of Antioch in the 1st century through Clement of Alexandria to Athanasius in the 4th century. I was delighted to read about pedagogical ideas and ideas around the organization of Christian spiritual life. So even though this book is directed towards science, it has as a very powerful companion theme, esoteric or contemplative or mystical, whichever word you would choose to use, development of the human and the idea of the optimal state of God's creation, which is far, far more radical, I think, than many people would, after a very short assessment, conclude. And it's a pleasure for me to launch this book because Doru has been a good colleague to me for a long time. We have shared supervisory responsibilities. He has generously and indefatigably produced research outcomes that have enhanced our department's status. And I would also like to draw attention to the fact that he is the holder at present of the Selby Old Fellowship, something that I know that all of the permanent staff are very grateful and glad that A, he sought out, B, he applied for, and C, he achieved. So I would just like to say, I congratulate you. Thank you very much. It was a great book. I promise you, when you sent me a copy, that I would also write a review of it, and I can tell you, it's going to be glowing.
Thank you. Thank you, Carole.